So, Heather, obviously, we're talking about impeachment. I'm going to be talking to Paul Waldman about impeachment more in the bottom half of the hour. But obviously, this is a big story, and this is going to totally change the dynamic. And what's fascinating on some level is, you made the point that we anticipated this would happen in January, that at least we would lead to this, and I think, frankly, the Democrats have been able to dodge a bullet to some extent, that because they had not filled this vacuum that is created when they're in power, that the Trump administration or the right didn't fill it themselves. Now, I'm not convinced, and you made the point that the phone call, which has been the sort of, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back, or at least appears to be the one. And you cited reporting Ryan Grimm in The Intercept had a piece that apparently was basically he was waiting to publish about the pressure that Nancy Pelosi was getting from those frontline Democrats. These are freshmen who are elected in districts that are either only slightly Democratic, favorable to Democrats, or slightly favorable to Republicans, known as the frontline Democrats, the ones that are theoretically most vulnerable. And apparently they went home on August recess and they were inundated by constituents who were like, you must impeach Donald Trump. That's why we elected you. And so this was happening. And then I think, fortunately for everybody, this whistleblower report came up. We haven't even fully seen the whistleblower report, but I imagine we will soon. Comes up and falls into Nancy Pelosi's lap and becomes sort of the catalyst, at least, for this reversal. And I, again, after Corey Lewandowski's performance last week, I think the momentum was already headed there. And I think it's not a coincidence. Like you said, the day after the phone call between the Trump and the president from Ukraine happened the day after the Mueller report, and or I should say Mueller testimony. And I think it's quite clear that was also the day they had decided, we're going to turn this around and we're going to investigate the investigators. And part of that is going to be digging up this stuff on Joe Biden. And this is they have been sort of hung in some respect by their own petard. But how do you think this should go? I mean, there are, that's the other thing that I think that the Democrats, I think it's an absolutely necessity. I think once they vote for impeachment, they are, at the very least, they have done what the American public asked of them to do to some degree. But I would be worried if they did it too quickly. I feel like they can't totally bungle it, but they can bungle it, can't they?
You bet. And there is discussion of, well, let's do this, this is the one, this is the impeachable offense. Let's deal with that. We'll get that vote and then, we'll move on. Well, that's not going to be good enough, because what Trump has done, this is an entire, systematic sort of assault on presidential norms and rules and laws. The Mueller report itself had 10 instances of potential obstruction of justice, which are pretty clear, that should be dealt with. And they don't have to do a lot with that. He did all the legwork and the investigation, but they do have to lay that out, and that needs to be part of any impeachment proceeding. There's also the corruption in office, which I think is terribly important. You can't just let that pass. You can't just say, well, that maybe that wasn't impeachable. Once you've opened this can of worms, you kind of have to look at it in a holistic way, because it isn't just this election interference, although that is certainly That's kind of the original sin, right, of the Trump campaign and Trump's organization. But there are all these other things that he has shown that he's exposed these weaknesses in the system, and these weaknesses must be shored up. And there's no way to do that, not really, if they do not take this up in impeachment. Now, some of the impeachment counts may not actually, get a majority. That happened in the Nixon situation. There were some that came up. There was one about his taxes. There was a couple of them that they didn't get a majority out of the Judiciary Committee. But that doesn't matter, that doesn't exonerate him. It just says that they were, unable to, quote, prove the case. They need to do these things. I mean, this is important. And by the way, it isn't that hard. There's a lot of documentation of what's been going on. I mean, this idea that somehow or another it's just overwhelming to get the investigation. We've got to get people to come up here and testify, and the White House won't let us, and we don't have the documents and all that. Those are excuses. There's plenty of information out there that they have access to. Now, granted, holding hearings has a dramatic factor. They're useful. I think in what you said earlier about Corey Lewandowski, his absolutely contemptuous attitude toward the Congress, that I think that contributed to the fact that Donald Trump is going to be impeached. You can imagine Rudy Giuliani doing something like that. I mean, these are useful, but they're not required. I mean, they have a lot of evidence already. So, in any case, what there was talk of Pelosi naming a select committee like they had in the Senate in Watergate. But she decided not to do that, largely on the basis of her progressive members, from what I understand, standing up and saying absolutely not, because they were afraid that this was going to be sort of siloed into one narrow impeachment count. And instead, she agreed, with, facing a rebellion in her troops, to allow the 6 committees, which it's oversight, ways and means, foreign relations, intelligence, judiciary, and finance, that all of them could continue their investigations and would report their findings to the Judiciary Committee. So that's where the central sort of gathering place will be.
This is going to be important. We're going to talk to Paul Waldman when we come back, and you and I will continue this conversation in parallel in the next hour. I'm Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio. Be right back with Paul Waldman. Digby will join me in the next hour.